All right, welcome. All right, now we're live. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mark Leon Goldberg. I am the host of Global Dispatches, and I'm coming to you live from the Carnegie International Nuclear Policy Conference. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, thanks for having me today. Really excited to be here. My name is Eliana Johns, and I'm a senior research associate with the Federation of American Scientists. On our team at FAS, we use open sources, including satellite imagery, to track the status and trends of global nuclear arsenals and provide information to advocate for the responsible reduction of nuclear arsenals and for accountability and transparency about nuclear weapons arsenals around the world.
And so just whenever you hear shorthand about how many nuclear weapons there are around the world or how many nuclear weapons each country possesses, that number basically comes from you and your team.
Yeah, it's really great to be a part of such an incredible team where it's been decades and decades of work built on, previous people who have worked on this issue in the past. And the team that we have now, they provide these estimates through FAS, but also in partnership with CPRI as well. So a lot of the numbers that you might see either in news sources or in academia originates from our estimates from over time.
So I wanted to kick off this conversation by having you tell the story of how your team uncovered news that China was massively expanding its nuclear arsenal far beyond, frankly, what the United States government intelligence sources thought at the time.
Yeah, it's really an interesting case study here as an example of just how open source analysis and satellite imagery analysis works. It demonstrates kind of an interplay, not just between open source analysts and government, but also demonstrates the collaborative field that OSINT really is. So starting off with kind of the beginning of where the story started is in 2018, the DoD released one of its reports on China's military power, indicating that China was planning to develop a new silo basing option for one of its ICBMs. And this is, kind of a hint of really big news that we saw coming out of the government. And then that same year, a researcher found a new test silo design at one of the facilities that China uses to test missile, do like missile tests and things. That was Catherine Dill, who was at the time at CNS. And in the next couple of years, Hans Christensen from FAS, who's been there for around 2 decades, ended up finding publicly disclosing a new training site with more silos that resembled what Catherine Dill had found on satellite imagery. And in that couple of years, we also had more reporting coming out of the DoD and from Stratcom, indicating again that there was going to be a significant expansion of the silo basing for China's ICBMs. And all of that was, and they actually referenced Han's findings at the training site, which was really interesting to kind of have that confirmation from government and understanding that maybe this is still something that needs to be examined and looked at. And so that was over the course of a few years. Fast forward to 2021, Decker Eveleth, who at the time was at the Middlebury Institute for International Studies, publicly disclosed the first location of these silos. And that was through, all this research and data accumulating over time with military training videos that were publicly released by China, all this stuff. So Decker publicly disclosed the first site, and then Matt Korda from the Federation of American Scientists built kind of off of that as well, and made a list of these assumptions to work off of, because he thought that there would have to be more silo fields than the first that was publicly disclosed. So he went and found the next silo field, which nobody, I think, was really expecting to have another one. And then another researcher from CASI, that the Air Defense's China Aeronautics Space Institute or Studies Institute, found the third silo field. So it's really interesting to see that kind of almost collaboration across the field, and how it takes years of time to build the data, kind of see what comes out of the US government, see what comes out of the Chinese government and state media, to then get to this point of understanding what the expansion looks like and being able to publicly disclose it, to then, start the conversation about what this was all about.
Well, I mean, I had you tell that story just because it's interesting, I think, to see some of the details of how this discovery was unfolded. And as you describe it, it really is this collaborative effort, mostly by nonprofits and philanthropies who, did so, and in having done so, just completely and irrevocably changed the debate on how we think about China's nuclear posture.
Yeah, it really is fascinating. It's one of the things that I really find interesting about open source as a practice is, it obviously is an expertise that you develop over time, but really anyone can do it because the information is publicly accessible. Commercial satellite imagery, a lot of times you do have to pay for it, but there are free platforms where if you know what you're looking for and if you're willing to take the time to generate that expertise, it's absolutely publicly accessible. So it's really cool.
Well, can I have you maybe just take a step back and make the case for why transparency around these issues are important? I mean, what you and your team discovered, was, like I said, radically different from what the United States intelligence estimates were. Why is it important to have that information out in the public sphere?
Yeah, so in my opinion, there's a lot of reasons why transparency is really a good thing, and there's three kind of main ones that come to mind. So the first is that it can actually support U.S. deterrence and assurance missions by helping to affirm and communicate what the United States position and posture is when they are transparent about their own arsenals and promoting this culture of transparency and openness about nuclear stockpiles, about nuclear modernization. And it also will assuage concerns about maybe a buildup or worst case scenario thinking about maybe what the United States is doing. And that's the same for other countries as well. We're being transparent and open about your stockpile, your arsenal, your doctrine actually can help with your credibility, but also help with other concerns that other countries might have. So that's kind of the first thing that I think of with the importance of or value of transparency. The second is it helps to be a reliable partner. So the United States has advocated for a really long time for Russia and China to be more transparent about their arsenal, to reduce risk, reduce miscalculation. And because the United States is able to be more open and transparent about what they have in their own arsenal or their own plans, it helps them set that example and be a reliable partner for engaging in that in the international sphere. So those are like two maybe more like security related concepts, but ultimately this kind of work, which kind of the third reason, is that it informs the debate. It informs the debate in the public, whether it's through academia or other researchers. And it also provides diplomats and governments to be able to talk about these issues without revealing sensitive information. And they can kind of rely on that open source, publicly available knowledge to then have conversations, to then address issues that they might be having with other countries, or again, to set this example of transparency. So it informs the public debate is really a key aspect of the work that we do at FAS as well, where we want to provide reliable information. And of course, our work is all estimates as well, but they're close enough to where people can use that data to have debates about these issues, to be informed, and in some cases even advocate for different policy areas.
Yeah, and again, it's just worth emphasizing how much that work completely changed the debate on China's nuclear posture and nuclear capabilities. In discussing the China example, you cited satellite imagery. In your work today, what besides satellite imagery do you use to try to deduce either nuclear stockpiles or even like nuclear intentions of countries of concern?
Yeah, so we used kind of two categories of data, if you will. One is state originating data, and the other is non-state originating. So state originating data could be anything from treaty data exchanges to military parade videos, state-run media, public statements and official doctrine. And then non-state originating data includes reporting by other researchers, satellite imagery, or even social media, where sometimes you'll have cases of just people posting on Twitter or Weibo chat or whatever of a tail rolling through their backyard, or like of a plane in the sky, and so sometimes that information can actually be really helpful as well. So we use those two sources, and again, as I mentioned before, it's an interesting process where over time you've got these incredible databases and like wealth of knowledge that's built up by decades and decades of looking at this data, and then you can kind of confirm or adjust maybe your numbers or your analysis, your expectation based on other new data that comes out. So it's really like it takes shape over time, and it's built on decades and decades of work that's been done by people prior.
Are there any like examples you can share of how your team has used social media to confirm the existence or some aspect of a nuclear program?
Yeah, there was one example that a colleague of mine worked on. I think he found a social media image. You can find this on the FAS website to get more information on it. But he found an image on social media of, I think it was the Indian Navy doing a yoga exercise on one of the frigates before they were like going out to do either a test or a deployment or something. And the way that the picture was taken, you could actually see parts of the ship that confirmed that they weren't loaded with a specific system that we were trying to check to see if they had removed it already. And so it confirmed that they had removed it from that ship. So that was a really interesting example of yoga poses on a ship. And then another really interesting one was last year. In September, China conducted a test of its ICBM, the DF-31AG, over the open ocean. I don't know if people might remember that. And I worked with another OSINT analyst, which again, an example of collaboration, to kind of pinpoint where that test may have taken place on Hainan Island. And one of the data points that we used, or a couple of data points, was social media videos of people who were videoing this launch taking place, and someone had actually taken a picture of the transporter erector launcher as it was moving to its location. So sometimes you can find some really interesting stuff on there of people just kind of taking pictures of something that's happening, or a government posting an update on its social media. But it's kind of a little bit more rare, but it definitely happens.
So there's a lot of talk, obviously, in the nuclear security space these days about the interaction between artificial intelligence and nuclear policy in general, whether or not, mapping or nuclear targeting is automated through AI, or even in some extreme cases could like humans be out of the loop in decision making by turning it over to artificial intelligence. But on the other side of the ledger, in your work, what are some of like the frontiers that AI might be opening in order to help you do your job better and help to kind of uncover the world's nuclear secrets?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of conversation about how AI could help with arms control verification and things like that. For OSINT specifically, there's a little bit of a gap maybe between government capacity to use AI for surveillance, reconnaissance, kind of satellite imagery aspects, but for commercially available right now, we're starting to see some pilot programs coming out. We're starting to see some papers and thought processes about how AI can be applied to open source analysis. One really interesting potential use case is object detection and object identification. of course, this depends on training on certain data sets and being able to, really narrow down your area of interest and the exact type of system you're looking for. Depends on if it's mobile or if it's a stationary object. But, that's one area that folks are looking at, to be able to take a certain area of land and identify within that area certain buildings or certain types of vehicles, which might sound like super not useful and boring,
Mhm.
but in some cases it could be helpful for getting an accurate count, or maybe if you didn't see something that was there before. And so I said it was pilot also just because while it can be useful for some areas, there's still, I think, a long way to go before we'd be able to replace people who have been, or even like match the expertise and the efficiency of people who have been doing this for a really long time. And so I'm excited to see maybe what new opportunities come out of it. Maybe it'll make my life a whole lot, easier, because it does take a while to analyze imagery, but we'll see.
I'm just sort of thinking now, I kind of came of age as a journalist in the run up to the Iraq War, right? In 2002, 2003, in which the US government asserted, falsely in retrospect, that Saddam Hussein was amassing weapons of mass destruction. And the US government selectively released a lot of intelligence to justify that claim. I just have to wonder and have to think that if we had people like you around doing your job, or if the field of OSINT existed as it does today back then, that might have provided like a corrective to like the government's assertions.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought, and people have brought up that point also for.
Really, I honestly just thought about it on the spot. I was like, oh man, I wish we had you back in 2003.
Well, people have brought it up before too, for like Cold War, escalation and uncertainty kind of aspects. Like, what if we just had this technology before? And it's, I think it's part of the motivation behind what we do is for, again, promoting an informed public to be able to debate and to have, some government accountability. So we not only do this open source and satellite imagery stuff, but part of the state originating data that we gather for the United States specifically is FOIA requests, so Freedom of Information Act, which is just one part of a process for democratizing information. And so it's hard to say like what the political will would have been back then if this information had been challenged. But, one of the things that we strive to do is, in a way, empathize with other countries, not justify, but try to understand where this change might be coming from. What is this, like a response to a particular action? Does this align with current strategy? Does it not? What might we see in the future? How has this changed over time? So having really that full context and analysis to be able to inform the public with a robust debate, instead of only having to rely on information coming out of the government, which may intentionally or may not intentionally be, skewing information, or maybe there's like an overclassification problem. So it's not always the case, and we definitely rely a lot on what the government releases. But there's definitely that aspect of like accountability and like pushing back on some ideas, or pushing the government to release the evidence or the analysis behind the conclusions, so we can have that as part of the public debate.
Well, I wanted to that end, actually ask you about maybe a couple of like potential flashpoints in the world today, and the role that your work, that open source intelligence can play in helping us understand the true nature of the issue. Iran is top of mind, obviously, these days. I mean, Iran has a civilian nuclear program, and the worry is that they may use that civilian nuclear program to create nuclear weapons. There was IAEA inspections. It's been a little bit on and on off again. What role can open source intelligence play in helping us understand whether or not Iran has made that decision to sprint towards the bomb?
Yeah, so that's it's a little bit tough in the open source to be able to get ahead of some of that like decision making, there's definitely ways that we can either confirm estimates and information put out by other government sources, or by the IAEA, whoever it is. A lot of that will have to do with satellite imagery analysis. I think this is actually an example with North Korea as well, where the further you get away from the last time there were people physically present on the site, the harder it becomes for open source analysts to really have a higher confidence of estimates. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. But there's definitely a role in open source practitioners and even just research analysts who use open source materials, but maybe not satellite imagery, to be able to try to also understand what is happening from that outside perspective. And we do the same thing with China as well, where we want it's really difficult, probably not impossible, but with some level of confidence, you might be able to understand what China's uranium enrichment program is looking like and how that might change their projections for the number of warheads in the future. But that's really difficult to do in probably the government as well. I don't know, but in general in the open source. But what we can do is we can monitor these sites. We can look at their policies, their statements, their interactions with corporations and governments and public vendors and things. And we can try to create that picture so that when the government releases something, or when a statement comes out of Iran, North Korea, wherever, then we can kind of match that up and see, does this align? Are we kind of thinking the right thing? And can we push back on any assumptions that are being made?
Mm-hmm. Your work is not like in secret. I have to imagine there's some discretion a bit around what you do. Are you allowed to like tell me what you're working on right now?
Yeah, I mean, we tend to be kind of open about stuff. So I guess this is like a something to look out for. So every 2 months we release what we call the Nuclear Notebook, which details the nuclear forces of of each nuclear armed state. So last month, 2 months ago, we released the China Nuclear Notebook. So I would definitely look at that. It's published in the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and it outlays our estimates of China's nuclear forces. And then the next one that we'll have coming out next month is on Russia. So each year we'll do the big three: Russia, US, China. And then, so that's definitely something to look out for that we just finished working on. And then a big part of what we do is also looking at the what the daily status, what the pattern of life is at a lot of different sites. So usually, I think it's interesting, but usually every day we spend a lot of time just going over sites all around the world and publishing findings either in blogs or looking at maybe the implications of current events. Mm-hmm. So right now we're working on Russia, and then some of the other analysis for other states as well. But definitely check out the China Notebook and then Russia when it comes out in May.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This was great.
Absolutely.
Thank you
for having me.
All right.